At this point, the sisters start discussing Pak's identity. They confirm that the real Pak is the Pak before he turned 15 years old. Because as neighbors living next door, they had never met him even once before he turned 15. They need to figure out why the Pak family hid their own son. At the same time, Pak is still unconscious. Jade is extremely anxious. She wants to call the police, but when the police ask for the name of the missing person, Jade doesn't know how to answer. Jade hung up the phone and went alone to the Pak family home to inform them about Pak's disappearance. Pak's dad was surprised that Jade was willing to speak up, but Jade didn't explain. She got straight to the point, asking why they hid their biological son until he was 15 and then presented a flawless Pak to the world. Her father-in-law angrily denied it, but her mother-in-law was indifferent, saying that as a stand-in, Jade had no right to ask such questions. Jade didn't back down, stating that even if Pak was a stand-in, he was still a necessary and important existence to them. This left the Pak family speechless. One of their subordinates reported that there had been no police reports related to Pak at the station. Pak's mom, seeing that Jade had no intention of leaving, reluctantly promised not to stand by and do nothing. As Jade was about to leave, a subordinate approached her and subtly hinted, through the detail of the kidnapper's mismatched eye colors, that the kidnapper was actually the real white Pak. The subordinate, having watched Pak's journey over the years, always thought he was pitiful and couldn't let it go. So, he shared this information with Jade. Jade immediately pieced everything together. She felt immense pain in her heart, a mix of guilt and heartbreak spreading through her mind. She felt guilty for almost teaming up with the kidnapper and heartbroken for Pak's situation over the years. At that moment, Shaw called her. She rushed anxiously to the hospital, where she learned that Shaw had rescued Pak from the fire. It turned out that Shaw had tracked down the fishing shop owner through the property records of the villa. When Shaw mentioned wanting to interview the owner about the orphanage disappearance case, the owner immediately drove him out. Shaw left empty-handed and disappointed, but on his way back, he spotted Pak speeding down the road. Sensing something suspicious, he turned around and went back, arriving just in time to rescue both of them before the explosion engulfed the villa in flames. Pak was now out of danger. Jade sat by his bedside, feeling deeply heartbroken. Having learned the truth, she could imagine how frightened and lonely Pak must have been before. When she was scared, it was Pak who ran to her. Now, she wanted to be the one to protect him. Meanwhile, the kidnapper received another text from the teacher, demanding to know if he was responsible for the arson. The message warned him not to act on his own again, and to stay quiet, stating this would be the last time cleaning up his mess. In his coma, Pak's memories took him back to his childhood, to the day he first saw the old chairman and the real Pak. His adoptive father, who worked for the old chairman, often handled black burlap sacks that the chairman brought to him. That night, the old chairman personally dealt with his grandson on the lake. Pak, who witnessed everything, was terrified. The old chairman approached Pak and told him, "Some monsters are born that way, but being born into the Pak family was their mistake. It's over now. The one responsible has already been put into the sack." He then said he would simply pick a new grandson to replace the old one. From that moment, Pak lost all motivation in life, until Jade appeared and healed him. At that moment, Pak heard Jade's voice in his mind. Once again, Jade brought him back from his slumber. He reached out and held Jade's hand, not wanting to let go for even a second. Pak's adoptive father was also rescued, but he remained unconscious. The hospital, owned by Shaw's father, had already sealed off any news about Pak's incident. Curious about Pak's connection to the fishing shop owner, Shaw asked about their relationship. Pak didn't hide anything, revealing that the owner was the one who raised him. Although intrigued, Shaw was more concerned about Pak's relationship with Jade. Pak's answer left Shaw both saddened and relieved. Saddened that Jade already had someone she belonged to, but relieved that Pak was protecting her. Taking the opportunity, Pak thanked Shaw for saving him and apologized for their previous misunderstandings. Pak then entrusted Shaw with the task of doing whatever it took to wake his adoptive father, confessing that he was a key witness in the orphanage disappearance case. Pak further explained that the orphanage incident, the threats, and the attempts to kill him were all orchestrated by the same person. Pak looked through the countless messages Jade had sent him last night. Each message was filled with urgency and worry. Pak felt deeply guilty, but now he still hadn't seen Jade. Jade had already returned home, searching through Pak's room looking for the kidnapper's phone. She felt guilty, knowing she couldn't stand by and watch Pak's situation unfold. Even if it meant exposing her past connection with the kidnapper, she had to provide the police with leads. But just as she reached the entrance of the police station, Pak arrived and snatched the phone from her. He knew exactly what Jade intended to do. Jade didn't want to leave just yet, admitting that she already knew who the real Pak was. No one knew what the other person might do next. Jade says she wants to protect Pak this time no matter what, but Pak won't allow it. He thinks that if Jade stays with him, she will be in danger and get hurt again. But Pak says he can't keep Jade away from him either, and he says from the bottom of his heart that he keeps Jade with him because he lives for her. Pak says it's because of her that he's been able to survive. After that, they can't hold back their feelings and hug each other tightly. Meanwhile, the president candidate for Pak was still performing for the media in preparation for his big cooking show. However, he received a disgusting package, a box of fish, crudely stitched together with thread. Pak's mom immediately realized it was her son's doing and chased after him. Back at the hospital, Jade was confused about how Pak had found her. Pak explained that after the cliff incident, he had installed a tracking system on Jade's phone. Jade also wanted to know Pak's location, but Pak refused to tell her. He then told Jade that if one day he went missing, she should never try to find him, because he would find her. Pak reassured Jade not to worry, saying things would soon be settled. Once he discarded the name, White Pak, he would start over with Jade, and they would become happy together. Soon after, Pak's adoptive father woke up. He regretted his soft-heartedness at the time. When the old chairman had entrusted the child to him, he discovered the child had not died. Unable to bring himself to kill the child who had escaped death, he thought that as long as the child lived quietly, everything would be fine. But he still underestimated the child's nature. Pak fully understood his adoptive father, just as his adoptive father had raised him. He hoped his father would reveal what happened to the bodies he had handled back then. Pak's mother had been following them and arrived at the old chairman's small villa, where she met her biological son. The reason Shaw knew that Jade could speak was because, while volunteering, Jade had been holding a child and humming a lullaby, and she happened to be seen by the director. The director accidentally revealed this to Shaw. Jade felt guilty for hiding this from Shaw, but Shaw didn't mind at all. He was simply happy to hear Jade's voice. Pak was discharged from the hospital and returned to work. For the first time, Jade stood beside Pak in front of the media. The couple worked together seamlessly. Seeing this, Jade's father, who had rarely been fully awake, was deeply moved and regained his consciousness. He felt proud of his daughter and son-in-law. Meanwhile, Pak's journalist friend, in an effort to get Pak to agree to an interview, worked hard to investigate the orphanage disappearance case. However, since the missing people were all orphans, he couldn't find any useful information. Lee also wanted to help Shaw solve the mystery, so he revealed to the journalist that one of the victims was a twin. The journalist quickly used his connections at the police station to gather information on the twin brother. This news shocked him, and he shared the information with Pak. By this time, Pak had already arrived at the burial site his adoptive father had mentioned. When he saw the personal report from his friend, he was equally stunned. It turned out that the twin brother was none other than his most trusted assistant. For the first time, Pak's assistant hung up on his call. In the backseat of the assistant's car lay an unconscious Jade. A terrible feeling rose in Pak's mind, and he called Jade again, but once again, there was no answer. Pak became frantic. It turned out that the assistant was the twin brother from the orphanage, and he had always viewed Pak as the target for his revenge. But just yesterday, he discovered that Ken, mysteriously holding a note, reported to Pak. When they arrived at the fishing shop, they overheard a conversation between the kidnapper and the shop owner. That was when he realized he had been targeting the wrong person all along. In his pursuit of revenge, he had kidnapped Jade and lured the kidnapper to the scene. But he had underestimated the kidnapper's incredible abilities. Even though he struck first, he was easily subdued. The kidnapper used his phone to send Pak the location, leading him to go there alone. When Pak arrived, he saw the glaring black bag. He rushed forward, only to find his assistant, barely alive, inside the bag. Pak demanded to know what the assistant had done to Jade. The assistant, struggling through the pain, told him that the kidnapper was right there. Before Pak could react, the roar of an engine came from behind. The kidnapper, with a playful attitude, had slipped away, leaving Pak behind. At that moment, Jade woke up. After surveying her surroundings, she quickly subdued the kidnapper and managed to escape the car. The couple embraced tightly, concerned for each other. The kidnapper attacked again, but they managed to dodge in time without serious harm. The kidnapper, in frustration, was grabbed by Paek and pulled out. Paek furiously scolded him, saying that if the kidnapper wanted his identity and position, he could have them back. But the kidnapper retorted, asking for Paek's wife as well. This was something Paek couldn't tolerate, and he struck the kidnapper with a heavy punch. However, the kidnapper, lacking any honor, pulled out a weapon. Paek immediately found himself at a disadvantage. Just as things seemed dire, the assistant rushed forward and took the fatal blow for Paek. Jade had already called the police, and after mocking the touching scene, the kidnapper temporarily fled. The police arrived quickly, and the assistant narrowly escaped death. The fleeing kidnapper was seething with anger, furious that no one was on his side. When he saw the news of the old man's death a year ago, he regained all his memories. He regretted not being able to personally deal with the old man. Now, the only person who wanted to stand by his side was his mother. Even his father wanted him to disappear again. He sent people to follow his mother, leading them to the current location. Although he had managed to escape for now, he knew that his father would never let him go. Paek's mother accused her husband of being so heartless. Her husband retorted, saying it was their son who had turned their lives into hell. Could they continue cleaning up his mess forever? Seeing how cold-hearted her husband was, Paek's mother revealed a secret her husband couldn't accept. She bluntly stated that neither their son nor her husband resembled the old chairman. The person who truly resembled him was someone else, and that person was the current Paek. Paek was actually the biological son of the white old chairman. Based on the address Paek provided, the police unearthed 4 human skeletons. After Shaw's identification, it was confirmed that they were the missing children from the orphanage. The assistant was then taken into custody for questioning by the police. Upon searching his home, they found surveillance equipment. The assistant had been secretly listening to Paek and tracking his location. Besides Paek, there was another target of surveillance, which the police suspected was the kidnapper. Jade told her sister everything she knew, and the sister's mind instantly cleared. She recalled an experience from her childhood. She had once heard her brother's cries and found the child who had been bullying him in the yard, who quickly ran away. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but now she realized that the child should have been the real Paek, because after that incident, the car accident had occurred. The sister suspected that her brother had seen the true face of the real Paek, and to cover up the truth, the Paek family had resorted to murder. At that moment, the doorbell rang and Jade's mother arrived. Yen didn't want to stay with this stepmother, so she said goodbye to Jade. Jade's mother, unfazed, openly criticized the couple for making things so public. She bluntly stated that if she had known it would come to this, she would have married Jade off to the rich heir instead. The words were said without much thought, but Yen instantly grasped the key point. The night before her runaway wedding, Paek had asked her if Jade was going to be married off to the heir, and only after that did he suggest going ahead with the wedding, but replacing the bride. She seemed to know who had sent her the DNA report. After Jade's mother left, Yan shared this guess with Jade, which deeply moved Jade. After Paek returned home, he couldn't wait to ask Paek for confirmation. She took out a new marriage contract and proposed that the groom could not request a divorce at any time, with a penalty of 2 billion for violating any clause. She also insisted that they must actively publicize their marriage. Paek had once said that he had liked her for a long time and that marrying her was something he had planned for a while. Now, Paek was very happy. She squatted down in front of Paek and asked if, after everything was over, he would be willing to marry her. But Paek shook his head and said no, because once everything was settled, he would propose to Jade. Paek told Jade that he had always been confused, not understanding why he had forced himself to live. But when he met Jade, he found the answer. The reason for living as Paek was to meet Jade. Jade eagerly threw herself into Paek's arms. The two sisters came before their father, and there was no surprise that Jade could speak. Yan had already anticipated this, since there was nothing in the family that their father didn't know. She demanded that her father reveal the details of the deal with the old chairman Paek. Her father recalled the night when Paek's old chairman knelt before him. At that time, he had already discovered that the car accident was caused by the Paek family. Filled with anger, he had wanted revenge. But Paek's old chairman had mentioned his weakness, that he was more sensitive to losses than to gains. Paek's old chairman made a promise. In addition to unconditionally agreeing to one of his requests, he would ensure that the grandson would accompany his son on the road to the afterlife. It would be a life for a life, a way to calm his anger. Now, though, his daughter was telling him that the child was still alive. This revelation was unbearable for him. He angrily arrived at the one-year memorial service for Chairman Park, armed with a gun. Jade sensed something was wrong and quickly called Park to warn him. At the same time, the police had traced the kidnapper's location through the assistant's eavesdropping software. Jade's father, enraged, demanded that the Park family hand over the real Park. Just then, an explosion erupted inside the building. Park's mother immediately realized it was her son's doing, because she had seen him before arriving at the scene. By the time Park arrived, the place was in chaos. People were evacuating from the building, and only Yan was still searching for Jade. In the confusion, Jade had disappeared. She had been taken hostage by the kidnapper. He called Park, and hearing Park's excited voice, the kidnapper felt a surge of exhilaration. He couldn't accept that Park was living a successful and perfect life, because that was exactly what the old Chairman Park had hoped for. He wanted to ruin Park, to make the old man rise from his grave in fury. He claimed this was just an appetizer, and he intended to make Park feel real suffering. As for the reason, it was because when he was on the brink of death, Park had merely stood by, watching him suffer and die. Now, he wanted to enjoy watching Park struggle. At this moment, the police sent the kidnapper's location to Park. Park tried to reassure Jade, telling her not to worry, but Jade told him not to come. This time, she would protect Park. She said her final goodbyes and confessions over the phone. As soon as the words left her mouth, she slammed on the accelerator, intending to crash through the road barrier with the thought of going down together. The surroundings became eerily silent, with only Park's heart-wrenching screams echoing through the phone. The rescue team found the car 20 meters underwater, but both passengers were missing. The media reported that Park's wife had been kidnapped and that she had fallen into the river with the criminal. A suspect sketch was released, and the public was urged to provide any information. Park, now visibly exhausted, held a press conference. In front of the cameras, he admitted with great difficulty he is not the real Park. He are not the grandson of the late Park family patriarch. If there is one identity that is truly his, it is that of a woman's husband. He then revealed Jade's identity to the public, pleading for the nation's help. With a trembling voice, Park described Jade's appearance: 28 years old, 167 cm tall, wearing black clothes at the time of the incident. He begged for anyone who had information to come forward, explaining that Jade was his only family and guardian. Park's vulnerability was clear as he appealed for help, his words heavy with grief and desperation for his lost wife.